They called her fragile, but fragile was not the right word. She was a nurse, a healer who had crossed stars to tend to wounds others were too proud to acknowledge. Where others carried weapons, she carried instruments that mended flesh and soothed pain. That was her crime in the eyes of the alien guards. She belonged to a species they considered weak, and her refusal to bow only deepened their contempt. She was taken during what should have been a routine assignment. The colony was supposed to be neutral, yet neutrality meant little when arrogance held the leash. The guards dragged her from her post, ignoring her protests, ignoring the cries of the injured who depended on her. Shackled, mocked, and paraded through corridors, she became their sport. To them, she was an example, an object to humiliate, proof that humanity could be bent and broken like glass. But she did not break. They struck her, tested her with blades that left shallow cuts, laughed at her trembling hands as she clutched at her side. They tried to make her scream, but she would not give them the satisfaction. Her voice, when it did escape, was soft, a whisper not for them but for herself. She repeated his name, like a prayer, like a reminder that she was not truly alone. It drove the guards to fury. They wanted despair, not defiance. They wanted to erase whatever strength kept her eyes steady in the face of their cruelty. Days bled into each other. Her cell stank of metal and fear. Chains rubbed raw against her wrists, and the cold of the floor crept into her bones. She counted breaths instead of hours, each inhale an act of defiance. They told her humanity was nothing more than vermin that had stumbled too far into a galaxy it did not understand. She listened in silence, because silence unnerved them more than argument. Every sneer, every mocking question, met with a gaze that carried no surrender. One night, when the torment was harsher than usual, the chief guard leaned close and hissed, "No one is coming for you. You are forgotten. You are nothing here." His spit landed on her cheek, and she blinked it away, still refusing to answer. It was not courage in the cinematic sense. It was something quieter, more enduring, born not of hatred but of faith. She knew who she had married. She knew the man behind the smile, the man who never boasted of his past, the man who once promised in a whisper that nothing in the universe would harm her as long as he drew breath. The guards did not understand silence as strength. They mistook it for weakness, laughing louder each time she endured. Their arrogance grew until they believed their actions invisible. They recorded her suffering, passed the files among themselves as trophies, fragments of humiliation to share and gloat over. They did not consider who else might see. They did not imagine their cruelty would reach the one person they should have feared above all others. Still, in her solitude, she did not know any of this. She only knew pain, chains, and the echo of boots outside her door. Yet even then, when her body faltered, her spirit clung to one truth: he would come. Perhaps not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but she trusted the inevitability of his arrival the way one trusts the rising of a sun. Her captors laughed at the idea. They joked that human mates were nothing but sentimental bonds, worthless threads that snapped under the weight of real power. She let them believe it. She gave them no reason to suspect that her whispered prayers were not fantasies but warnings they were too blind to hear. For every time they struck her, for every time they mocked her fragility, for every time they declared her unimportant, she imagined his eyes narrowing, his steps already set in motion. It gave her a strength they could not comprehend. In their arrogance, the guards thought they had silenced a human. In truth, they had summoned something far darker. Her suffering was not the story's end. It was only the spark. He was not known by his name. In shadows, among whispers that circulated through classified archives and war stories, he was spoken of with a different title. Some called him the assassin, others the ghost, but all agreed he was the man governments summoned when failure was not an option. His existence was denied officially, but enemies of Earth had felt his hand without ever seeing his face. He had vanished from that life years ago, leaving behind violence for peace, burying blades under soil in the hope he would never need them again. He chose her instead: quiet laughter, simple mornings, a life where his hands could touch without killing. When the encrypted transmission arrived, it broke that world. Grainy footage of her cell, her blood on the floor, the sound of jeers around her, delivered by an anonymous source who either pitied her or feared what would happen when he saw it. The moment his eyes locked onto her swollen face, the part of him that had retired died instantly. The man who had tried to live as ordinary no longer existed. What remained was the weapon the galaxy had forgotten, and now it had reason to act. There was no shouting, no dramatic rage. His response was silence, the kind that always preceded ruin. He replayed the recording until every detail was etched into memory: the guard's smirk, the layout of the cell, the insignias on uniforms, the faint hum of alien generators. To others, these might be fragments. To him, they were a blueprint. He mapped their arrogance as carefully as he mapped their fortress. Those who had worked alongside him in the past knew what such calm meant. He was not a soldier driven by emotion, he was a craftsman of violence, patient and deliberate. He packed nothing unnecessary, carried no weight that could slow him. Weapons were chosen with precision, not excess. Each tool had a purpose, and each purpose had already been calculated. He did not waste time on questions of diplomacy. He understood one thing only: those who hurt her had marked themselves for extinction. Alien Command, when alerted to his movements, laughed at the warnings. They labeled him a myth exaggerated by human fearmongering. What could one man do against their fleets, their walls, their battalions? They had seen humans bleed too easily, die too quickly, cry too loudly. To them, he was not a threat but a nuisance, the kind of insect crushed under a boot. Their officers dismissed reports of his past as exaggeration. No one wanted to believe that an individual could dismantle entire regimes without leaving a trace of himself behind. He prepared in silence, but his silence was not emptiness, it was intent sharpening. Every step was stripped of hesitation, every movement carried the weight of inevitability. The memory of her voice, soft and steady even under torment, fueled him in ways no command ever had. He did not move out of vengeance alone but out of devotion, a devotion so absolute that it became more dangerous than hatred. Hatred burns out, devotion does not. The galaxy had seen human resilience on battlefields, but resilience was survival. This was different. This was surgical. This was what happened when devotion armed itself with skill and patience. He left his safe house without ceremony, his last glance at the world behind him carrying no promise of return. He needed none. He was already dead to everything except the mission, and in that acceptance lay his greatest power. On the periphery of the alien network, faint disturbances began to ripple, supply convoys disrupted without explanation, surveillance drones vanishing, guards stationed on outer posts silenced before they could report. None of it made sense to the command center. They had dismissed him as a rumor, but rumors do not cut through steel doors and leave halls empty. Rumors do not erase outposts from maps without alarms sounding. Still, he had not yet revealed himself. These were only the beginning movements, pressure applied to expose fault lines. His true storm had not yet broken. He carried the knowledge of her suffering like a blade unsheathed, and every second it remained unsatisfied sharpened it further. The aliens believed they had caged a nurse. What they had truly done was awaken the man who had sworn to protect her. They had traded their laughter for their doom, and they had not yet realized it. The first strike came without warning, and that was what unsettled them most. An outpost scheduled for routine communication simply went silent. When soldiers were sent to investigate, they found corridors emptied of life, weapons still in racks, and monitors flickering with static. The guards who had manned the outposts were not missing, they were arranged with calculated precision, lifeless bodies positioned in ways that communicated intention rather than chaos. It was not slaughter, it was a message. The command dismissed it as internal failure, yet fear seeped through the lower ranks. Men and women who had laughed while tormenting prisoners now walked with hands close to their weapons, glancing over shoulders at shadows that seemed thicker than before. The officer class barked at them to stand tall, but even they began to quiet their voices when rumors spread. One man was moving through their territories. One human. He did not attack like an army. He dismantled them like an engineer taking apart a flawed machine. He traced their power grids and turned them into traps, manipulated ventilation systems until entire barracks suffocated in their sleep, and left records intact for survivors to find in the morning. Where they expected brute force, they found intellect woven with cruelty. Each loss left no room for misinterpretation. This was not chaos. This was orchestration. Patrols were doubled, alarms reinforced, and checkpoints built, but none of it mattered. He moved with an understanding of their systems, as though he had designed them himself. He had studied their arrogance until it became a weapon in his hands. Guards sent to intercept him discovered their own supplies poisoned, their own ships sabotaged before liftoff. In every encounter, he dictated the terms without ever revealing himself fully. The galaxy had called him a ghost for years, and now they remembered why. Panic began to fester. Those who once mocked humans spoke in whispers now, their voices betraying unease. They recalled the nurse they had captured, her silence, her refusal to scream. Some began to wonder if that silence had been defiance backed by something greater. Every night they heard echoes, steps where none should be, whispers through broken comms, the faint click of a blade unsheathing. Sleep became impossible. When one guard collapsed from exhaustion, others swore it was no accident. No one could rest under the thought that he might already be in the room. The higher officers maintained their denial, repeating that humans were incapable of true terror. But the evidence before them was undeniable. Reports stacked higher with each passing day: vanished squads, sabotaged convoys, facilities reduced to tombs. Yet there was no demand for ransom, no plea for negotiation. The man they had wronged moved without bargaining. His silence was as merciless as it was terrifying. What unsettled them most was his precision. He never struck civilians, never wasted time on targets unrelated to the guards who had tormented his wife. His focus was surgical, his wrath concentrated like a scalpel. The message was unmistakable. This was not random revenge, this was judgment. Those who had laughed at her suffering now awaited their own reckoning with dread that grew heavier each passing hour. Broadcasts began leaking, not from him, but from the systems he hacked. Moments of their cruelty toward her appeared on public channels, evidence that could no longer be hidden. The galaxy that once looked away now stared in horror. Allies turned uneasy, questioning whether they wished to be associated with such dishonor. In every corner of the Empire, whispers spread: if this was the response of one human, what would happen if humanity itself decided to unleash its full strength? Still, he remained unseen. That was his greatest weapon, not just the bodies left behind, but the anticipation of what he would do next. Every soldier forced to stand guard in the dead of night wondered if the flicker of light at the end of the hall was nothing, or the last thing they would ever see. Their laughter was gone. Their arrogance had decayed. In its place grew a fear that threatened to fracture the very structure of their command. And all of it was only preparation. He had not yet touched the fortress where she was held. Every step he took, every strike he made, was simply clearing the path toward her. The guards did not know it, but their nightmare had only begun. The fortress that held her was not meant to be penetrated. Its walls were carved from alloy mined in dead stars, its gates layered with security protocols designed to deter fleets, and its halls filled with soldiers who had once taken pride in breaking prisoners. For years it had stood as a symbol of dominance, but by the time he reached its perimeter, it was already hollowed by fear. Reports of missing patrols had arrived days late, messages scrambled beyond recognition. Inside, soldiers tried to convince themselves that nothing could breach their stronghold. Yet every torch-lit corridor carried the weight of expectation, as though the walls themselves waited to be cut open. He entered without fanfare. Locks disengaged without alarms, cameras flickered to static, and the great doors meant to withstand bombardments swung silently at his touch. The guards stationed near the entrance never raised their weapons. Their throats had been cut before their minds registered movement. Silence spread faster than screams. Step by step he advanced, leaving behind a trail of precision death. Not a single strike was wasted. Each kill was deliberate, each removal of life another stone collapsing from their fortress of arrogance. By the time he reached the inner corridors, the air reeked of terror. Survivors huddled in groups, whispering prayers to gods that had never before mattered to them. They had mocked humanity as fragile, yet their own resolve fractured before the presence of one human who refused to be denied. He cut through security barriers as though they were paper, tore past checkpoints like shadows slipping through fingers. The fortress that had imprisoned her was no fortress at all. It was a tomb, and he was the one sealing it. At the heart of the stronghold, the officer who had overseen her torment tried to muster defiance. Surrounded by guards, armored in technology, and bolstered by authority, he still projected arrogance. His words echoed through the chamber as he faced the intruder. "You dare come here alone? You dare stand against us?" But the man did not answer with bravado. He answered with movement so precise it silenced the room. The first guard fell before his weapon left its sheath, the second collapsed with a broken spine, the third's armor cracked as though struck by invisible force. It was not a battle. It was disassembly. Every guard fell in seconds, their bodies arranged in silence that mocked the officer's authority. He was left standing, trembling with the realization that rank meant nothing. "You cannot," he began, but the words died as cold eyes met his. The human spoke, his voice quiet but heavy enough to crush pride. "Alone is all I need to be." The officer struck first, a desperate lunge fueled by fear rather than confidence. His blade met nothing but air before it was wrenched from his hands. The human's counter was merciless, a sequence of strikes so efficient it seemed mechanical, yet each carried the weight of devotion sharpened into fury. The officer's body staggered under blows he could not anticipate, his strength dissolving before precision that turned every defense into weakness. Within moments he was on his knees, staring up at a man who should never have reached him, realizing too late that cruelty had summoned its own destroyer. Chains clattered as a cell door opened nearby. She emerged slowly, frail from wounds and hunger but alive. Her eyes, dulled by captivity, brightened the moment they found him. She whispered, hoarse but certain, "I knew you'd come." For the first time since his silence had begun, he let himself breathe. He steadied her with hands that had ended lives but trembled now at the touch of her. The officer, bloodied but not yet finished, croaked desperate words. "You won't escape. They'll come for you both. They'll hunt you across the stars." The human turned to him, gaze unflinching. "Then let them try. But first you'll speak." He forced the officer to broadcast across the fortress network, transmitting the sight of their leader broken and humiliated, his authority stripped as easily as his weapons. The message carried farther than walls, reaching ears unprepared for the sight of a human standing victorious where entire battalions had failed. When the officer's usefulness ended, so did his life. The final strike was clean, efficient, and undeniable. With him fell the illusion of control. The fortress that had mocked human fragility collapsed into silence, its legacy rewritten in blood. She leaned against her husband as alarms wailed in hollow defiance, and together they walked out, leaving behind ruins not just of walls but of certainty itself. The galaxy had underestimated one man, and that mistake would echo for generations. News of the fortress's fall spread faster than command could contain it. What was meant to be a prison of dominance became a monument to failure. Entire garrisons that once boasted of invulnerability whispered in corridors, asking how one man had reduced their symbol of control into ash. Denials issued by their leaders rang hollow, for survivors carried memories too vivid to ignore. They spoke of a presence that moved like inevitability, of a human whose silence was more terrifying than any weapon they had ever faced. The Empire's propaganda machine tried to paint it as sabotage, claiming traitors within had orchestrated the disaster. Yet the lie did not hold. Too many soldiers had witnessed bodies arranged with deliberate precision, too many had heard the final broadcast of their commanding officer, broken and forced to admit weakness. The image of him kneeling before a single human spread across channels faster than sensors could erase. No amount of editing could erase the fear etched into his face. Across the galaxy, whispers turned into lessons. Species who once scoffed at human fragility began rethinking the measure of strength. If one man could dismantle an empire's fortress for the sake of one woman, what would humanity unleash if their survival as a people were truly threatened? Strategists redrew their models, leaders restructured alliances, and common soldiers found themselves waking in the night at the thought of footsteps in the dark. For her, recovery was slow but unbroken. She had endured their cruelty without surrender, and now she endured healing with the same quiet resolve. Where others saw scars, he saw proof that she had not been defeated. She walked again, her voice regained its strength, and though the galaxy gossiped about the assassin, she knew the truth, that beneath the title and the fear, he was simply the man who had kept his promise. He did not remain to bask in fear or glory. The moment she was safe, he disappeared as he always had, vanishing into the folds of obscurity. No interviews, no speeches, no demands. His silence continued, but now it was laced with warning. His absence was not retreat. It was a shadow reminding those who had mocked humanity that vengeance could return at any time. The Empire tried to recover its posture, but even its most loyal soldiers hesitated before mocking another human. Training manuals began to include scenarios based on his tactics, though none could fully replicate the precision that had undone them. Children of alien worlds grew up hearing the story in hushed tones: the human nurse who endured without breaking, the assassin husband who came for her, and the fortress that fell not to an army, but to devotion sharpened into a blade. Generals argued that humanity should never have been underestimated, but their words were empty apologies to the dead. The lesson had already been carved into history, not with ink but with silence and fear. One man had changed the perception of an entire species. No longer were humans dismissed as fragile healers or expendable labor. They were seen as unpredictable, capable of acts no algorithm could predict, no calculation could contain. In the centuries that followed, the tale never softened. Empires rose and fell, but the memory of the fortress remained untouched by time. It was not remembered as the place where a nurse was held, it was remembered as the place where arrogance ended. Every officer trained after that day was told the same rule: never underestimate a human. The punishment for forgetting was not defeat, it was erasure. Her name, spoken softly by those she healed after her survival, became a symbol of resilience. His, unspoken in official channels, lingered like a shadow over the galaxy's conscience. Together they became more than individuals. They became a reminder that strength is not measured in fleets or fortresses but in the resolve of those who refuse to bow. The galaxy never again laughed when humanity entered a room. They remembered the silence of a nurse under torture. They remembered the vengeance of her husband. And in every corner, one truth spread like a warning carved into the fabric of history: hurt one human, and you invite the wrath of all.